Great, so the next route we're going to talk about is the national route. This route was studied during the Fall Street Flats Area Plan. Kind of the key reason why we looked at this is because it does address that the challenge that we just mentioned was the impacts to both the produce grow businesses and the Cottonwood community gardens that are in a constrained segment of Malkin Avenue. And so during the New St. Paul's policy statement, we looked at different variations of national for the site. And when we looked at a diagonal route, that really impacted how they could provide a world-class hospital for the city and the region. And so we looked at other routes, such as a grid network, and whether or not that could still serve as an arterial. And there were challenges to some of the capacity and the ability to keep trucks and goods movement and cars, keep them on the arterial to prevent them from shortcutting through the neighborhood. And so what we decided on was this route that has an S-curve in it. And so it still maintains that same route through the hospital site along the north edge of Trillium Park. And then when I mention this S-curve, what it means is two 90-degree turns that are back-to-back. And so kind of picture McGill and Nanaimo. That intersection now is a 90-degree turn on an arterial. And there will be two of those around Trillium, the northeast corner of Trillium Park, and also the southeast corner of Trillium Park. And that on the east side there is the National Works Yard. And so the route would continue to run along National Avenue, which is adjacent to the rail yard as well in the south. That rail yard is the Via rail yard that serves Pacific Central Station. The overpass would then start ramping just east of Chest Street. Chest Street is where National ends today. And what's there now is a fire training facility that Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services uses to train the firefighters in the city. And there's also a heavy urban search and rescue facility. And that's kind of more of a federal facility as well. There will be more detail on this in the next couple of days as well. And so the overpass would begin just where that facility is. It would start ramping up. The reason why this structure would need to be longer is it has to cross 14 tracks. It has to cross kind of the widest part of the rail yard there. The other reason is that there's a curved track that connects from this yard to Pacific Central. So that curved track comes around here. And so the overpass would need to span and clear both those rail yards. Then it would also pass over Barney Drive, which is this industrial street just west of Clark, and then also tee into Clark at Wright Street. So again, the full detailed map of land impacts is in your resource guide. I'm going to focus on some of those, the big highlights. And so the key benefit of the national route is that it allows us to downgrade prior to a more local serving street again. It also avoids impacts to Strathcona Park and the Cottonwood Community Gardens, produce for businesses on Malkin, and also the animal services facility that's also on Malkin. Now the challenge with that is that we have an indirect route. It no longer truly runs east-west, it dips south and then continues. And so there are safety concerns with that as well. We see it at McGill and Nanaimo now. There's more collisions. Trucks and larger vehicles, when they're turning, don't always stay in their lanes. That causes delay. It's also, there's not an opportunity to cross either if you're walking and cycling. And so it creates more of those challenges that you wouldn't see if the road were straight and it were what we call a mid-block segment or your more traditional four-way intersection. The other challenge with National is that because of the route going further south towards the rail yards, it's no longer close to the community. Now, some may see that as a good thing, but if you're trying to take the bus, that means you're gonna have to walk quite a bit further to get there. And if you're walking further than 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you're less likely to take the bus, and it's gonna be more difficult as well. Because of the route alignment as well, connecting further south to Grant Street, it's very close to the current intersection at Terminal and East First Ave. And so during peak hours with lots of vehicles making turns, going through the intersection, the distance and the spacing gets challenging. Queues might back into the other intersection. And so there's challenges with that because Clark is a major arterial. It serves the port, there's a lot of trucks, and it's part of the major road network that serves a large regional purpose as well. The other big challenge of National is that it runs through the fire training facility and heavy urban search and rescue site. And by doing so, we're not able to rebuild or mitigate that in that same space. And so it requires relocating to a new space. And that requires purchasing a new piece of land that kind of has is in an industrial area that can serve that same need, and then rebuilding it as well. National is also spanning at the widest segment of the rail yards, about 14 rail tracks as well. So longer structure, longer distance if you're crossing, and longer structure. There's also trade-offs of impacts for this route as well, especially in the area between Trillium Park and National Works Yard. So some of the drawings you might see don't impact Trillium Park. That was kind of the design principle we had earlier when we looked at it. We heard it was important to preserve parks and protect parkland. And so one way we could look at it is to design the road a little further to the east, and that would have an impact to the National Works Yard. Now, as we get through the design phases and we hear from you what those guiding principles are, this can change. And so we want to hear from you what you value, and like what some of those design principles are that we should carry throughout into the design phases. And of course, with all the routes, there's impacts to some of the local businesses. And in this case, it would be on Grant Street, just east of those rail tracks. So we also heard several variations from the community, primarily the Strathcona Residents Association. And so the first one we heard was back in May 2017 when we brought the area plan to council. And they suggested a route through the civic facilities. And kind of what we heard from them was that the S-curve for National is a challenge. So let's try to mitigate that. And so one way to do that would be there's two routes overlapping. It's the one that's further north and then continues along the same overpass as the National route along Grant. And so how this route tries to address that S-curve and mitigate the impacts to businesses, gardens, and parks by using the city lands that we have. The other variation we heard more recently was the better way, or the National Charles overpass option. And so this route was also attempting to mitigate those same impacts to businesses, gardens, parks, but also address the challenges of the structure for National and that intersection proximity to Grant and Clark. So the suggestion was that we could bring the structure back up to National, to Charles, which is where Malkin aligns with. And so we haven't had that time to look into more detail, the very detailed engineering structural work. So there are some things that we would still need to test out. This is kind of the general alignment that it would take. What we do know already is that it's more indirect. So it dips down to the south and then comes back to the north. There's still the challenges of the S-curve with the main National route. There's also, it still requires the relocation of the fire training facility and the heavy urban search and rescue. So more detail of these is provided, and I think you'll hear more throughout the weeks as well. So just to kind of finish off on the National routes, the Malkin and National route options were the two leading options that the city presented in 2016. There was an open house in March when we were doing the Flats Area Plan, and these were the options that were brought forth and presented to the community back then. We ruled out the other options at that time, and we presented these to the committee to get further feedback, and on a recommendation of which route to continue designing.
And then a little spoiler, some people came to the open house and said, "I don't like either of these," and so the city said, "Okay, we'll think of some more." So again, back to our slide deck. Again, we're going to get a chance to do some digestion. I saw some of you are doing table discussions, others are doing pairs and trios. I encourage you to do whatever works for you to get a chance to digest the material that you just saw, and to capture those questions on cards so we can come back to them. The facilitators have been diligently inputting them. So you've got about 5 minutes, 6 minutes to digest this. Go ahead.